very similar looking. That you have Pinkish's collage house with its incredible complex kind of facade of these things, surfaces, doors taken from different places and put together. And if you look at Kroll's design, also it seems to look like that. But if you think about both of the processes for both of these, it's very different from each other. While with Pinkish's collage house, there was one client, who was involved in some way in collecting those doors and putting them together to make that facade. It was to make it look interesting. Right? What you have with Kroll's work is that he's collaborating with 50, 20 different families, each of them wanting their own stuff. And when he puts all of that thing together, it emerges to look like what it does, right? So although at the surface they seem similar, the processes that are involved within it are substantially different from each other. One is aesthetic of informality and playfulness that Pinkish is using in his architecture, while the other one is looking at processes that are leading to that playful variable kind of architecture. So it's a little different from each other, but you're right in making that connection. That's an interesting connection that you've brought.
But I think as a process, Kroll is not approaching the building from the point of view of how it looks fundamentally. He's not. It could change, and that's why he's very comfortable. If you add 3 more things, and it changes. In fact, he's wanting that kind of change. That you add more things, you constantly keep modifying the entire building. He's quite open to that. Ron, I just realized that in the earlier when we were seeing the Dutch kind of examples, we didn't talk about Habraken, because
no,
I think we missed that. See, one of the sort of key how do I say ideas in architecture is, and also it has to do with what is the role of the architect in the context of architect-client relationship. Okay, so for example, if you take the works of Hermann Hertzberger or Piet Blom, we saw the cube houses. Remember, all of these guys are fundamentally actually influenced by another architect named N.J. Habraken, who basically argued that the role of architect is actually to create these supports, okay, which can then be filled by the clients themselves. Okay, so you don't create a complete kind of a set, but you create a system of supports that can then be occupied by people. Okay, and many of the Dutch architects actually who have trained under him or have worked with him are influenced by this idea, and you will find that in many of their works as well. Yeah. There is a difference between between Moshe Safdie and Kroll as well. In Moshe Safdie's case, everything is designed to the T. The system is designed to the T. You can add more to it, okay, but you cannot add a different thing to that system. That's the fundamental difference. In Kroll's case, he's open to his system is designed to allow for new things to be added to it. Yeah, that's I think the fundamental difference there. Rutik, you want to?
Rutik wanted to say something,
or
no,
Abhijna?
Yeah.
So, may I speak?
Yes, please.
Sure.
So I have 2 questions and a few comments. The first question is, how did Lucian Kroll communicate with the student body in order to design the hostel block? The question comes because for a person with no architectural background has more inclination towards the aesthetics and interiors other than arrangement of spaces or circulation. Light could be a factor, however, a well-lit artificial room may also do the same. That's the first question. Do you want to answer it, or may I go to the next one?
Just ask everything, then we'll come back. Yeah.
So the second is, how do you involve people's participation in terms of large residential projects on community level with so many different thoughts? Then I have a few comments. Like, I think it's similar. We face similar issues when we look at redevelopment projects. a lot of time the disagreement itself lies in the typology of house they need. For example, people residing in a G+1 small structures ask for a penthouse just because they have one story above. Just like the last project you showed, if we somehow followed similar lines, we could make the space much lively. And the other one is in biker wall project, why is it not that the building itself becomes an abstract wall instead of creating one on the other side? And the last comment is when we involve people, there are much more wants than needs. You tie them together is what is done by an architect. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, actually, in many ways, all of your questions are related to each other. The way I am reading your questions is that your concern is really about the way in which we get people to participate within process. Like, क्या कैसे कर सकते हैं? That is really a fundamental. And yeah, that is one of the most difficult things to do because it requires another kind of training entirely. It requires a training of the year, and an ability to be able to speak. It doesn't require too much skill architecturally, making things, to understand how toilets work. And you need to know that as well. But what is even more important to do is to be able to build consensus, to be able to convince people of things, and to be able to listen to their issues and be able to analyze them. Unfortunately, as architects, and we don't seem to be necessarily be trained. I mean, at least the conventional curriculum doesn't train you to do that. The conventional curriculum focuses on things like form, space, order. That is the way that we imagine what architecture is going to be. But as we know once, and as you were saying, right, when you're working within large projects, our main thing is actually how to build a team. And when you go out into the practice, actually, all architecture is actually teamwork. It's about how does one build together the momentum to carry a project through. One of the reasons why we have study trips as an integral part of architecture courses is because it teaches you that. It teaches you how to speak to each other. It teaches you how to deal with egomaniacs. It teaches you how to deal with people who have no skill, people who are lazy, people who are extraordinarily bright but are pompous asses. It teaches you how to work with all of these people so that you're able to create something together. So one of the reasons why we try and do these study trips is to begin to insert within the architecture course an ability to really think about collectives and think about teams, think about larger goods rather than individual egos. Because that is really required when you're working within teams. But I think there have also been many architects who've tried to deal with community participation in an important way. They have very often learned from many other disciplines like sociology, economics, many other psychology. And what happens is that they work with these kinds of multidisciplinary teams to develop the projects. And yeah, it is a messy process. It is not a fast process. It is clumsy. It is full of egos, full of all of these things. I mean, you all must be living in some sort of apartment building, and just think about a society meeting and the amount of fights that I had within the society meeting. Now just imagine that at a larger scale in most states. But it really requires a great deal of skill to be able to navigate that. That's a skill that architects should have if they choose to kind of walk down that path.
I'm Ritik.
The second, there was a second question. Sorry, I'll just respond to that. That why didn't he just build a wall? Yeah, I mean, why build housing? Why can't you just build walls? Yeah, yeah. I mean, so you can we can argue it from the kind of structural point of view also. In order to build a wall of that height, it will have to have some certain thickness. Okay. And then you can argue that, well, if you're going to build a wall of that thickness, might as well occupy it, So very simply, I'm giving you a very simple kind of structural explanation. The other is, of course, that that there is still a difference when you have a wall which is standing as a blank entity, whereas a wall which is occupied. Okay, so that there is still a fundamental difference. There is still an association with the outside which is made. That you're not. You have to understand. It's not only the question is not only blocking the outside from the inside. Yeah, the question was also to, in many ways, keep a relationship with the outside. Otherwise you are isolating yourself completely, like a fortress, and he didn't want that. So that's why this solution, I guess.
I think that is.
Like adding to the sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
Like adding to the same point, was there in the bikers wall? So was there any kind of class distinction, or like the elite will live inside the wall or kind of on the edge, or was there any kind of
This is a good question,
allotment of
Abhidnya.
The
It's a very
apartments,
good
yeah,
question.
there is a class distinction, Rohan. If you see the
Yeah, there is.
apartments which are on the, or whatever those row houses that are on the inside, they are larger, relatively larger. Okay, they also have, if you see, they also, I think, have a front yard and a backyard kind of a condition, typical kind of English kind of typologies of row housing. Whereas the wall are smaller units. The wall are smaller units, yes.
Yeah. Rutik had a question.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I had some points on Giancarlo Di Carlo. So, like I studied some of his structures and found that they were like separate units combined together or consolidated together, similar to the Sidco housing of Raj Reval or the LIC colony you mentioned. The second thing I found was like I read about him joining the anarchist movement and talking about like the idea of stateless government and decentralization at its peak. Like if you are having a stateless government, then the decentralization in that system would be like a great thought. So the reflection of that, the joining of that movement in its structures can be seen like through the circular in between spaces and the points of interaction and bridges he makes to decentralize the whole structure and not keeping one element in the structure which is considered to be centered. Another thing I thought was like he was an Italian, so I had this study. I had read about the Super Studio thing. Like they had those were Italian guys too, and they had this continuous movement. So I tried to find some connections between Di Carlo and the continuous movement, but I couldn't find any. But the the continuous movement actually stood for a single unit of architecture and a single design which clarifies all the motives, whereas Di Carlo was more of this decentralization process. So I found it very contrasting, but within the same country and happening at the same time.
Yeah. Super Studio's work is very different, coming from a very, very different sensibility. In fact, we'll probably get to Super Studio a little later on through Archigram. Later on, I think 2 classes from now.
Yeah.
What we should do is perhaps move into today's lecture. And Shirish, you want to pick 6 people today, right
Yeah,
now?
let's do that. Let's
Before
do
we
that
begin,
right
or
now.
afterwards? Makes, yeah. Okay, just pick.
Let's pick right now, no? It's
Okay.
easier. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm picking, just a second. We have done this. Okay, where's the list? Sorry, just hold on. Sejal, yeah, Fleur, Gargi, Bhavika, Sejal, Fleur, Gargi, Bhavika, Shubhangi. Yeah, 5. Sejal, Fleur, Gargi, Bhavika, Shubhangi.
Type it out in the chat.
I'll type
so
it
that
out.
it's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chal. Well, I'll start with the next today's lecture. Today we are. Sorry, Ruhin, you are saying something, were you?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Today we are going to Japan. And we are going to, I mean, in many ways, these are all very similar in many aspects. All the various architects that we are seeing, because they were all influencing each other. So you'll find that a lot of what we are looking at today in today's lecture has already been echoed in the past 2 lectures, the ones that we were looking at, the Team 10 Dutch structuralists, as well as the work of the what were we doing here last week? Giancarlo De Carlo, right? But right now we are going all the way across to Japan at that time. And Japan, as you know, was part of the Axis that lost the Second World War. And after it lost the Second World War, and of course it lost it in the most dramatic fashion with the explosion of the atomic bombs, both at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that destroyed those cities entirely. And Tokyo itself had been completely bombed out by the Allies. After the war, the Allies who had won the war occupied Japan. Under President Truman, there was a kind of entire period where there was an effort being made where this man called MacArthur, who was Douglas MacArthur, was placed within Japan, would advise the emperor on how to reform the whole of Japan. And some radical reforms were put in place at this time. A great amount of money was pumped in to revive the economy of Japan as well. So it was in 1952 that the Allies actually left Japan, the Americans left Japan, and that's when actually Japan started this incredible renaissance of economy and culture. A huge sort of jump happened. Just look at this detail, where the gross national product rose by 420% from 1960 to 1970. An enormous sudden rise happened, and this was again, you could call it a flowering of popular culture, music, movies, anime, manga, all of these incredible things that we all kind of take for granted from Japan. All of these really rose like crazy in this particular period of time. Okay. It is in this period of time that we also had a movement of architecture that has become very famous, that grew in Japan. It's called the Japanese Metabolists. Metabolism. We will be looking at some of these works that I have placed in this sort of chart, just to kind of look at what are the various, and every one of the colors represents the work of one architect. But it's largely bookended with two large events: the World Design Conference in 1960 and the Osaka Expo in 1970. So this is really what the period is called of when Japanese metabolism was considered to be the most, I guess that's what they call the Japanese metabolist period. But the person who was really, I guess you could call it the godfather of it all, the elder statesman of it all, is a man called Kenzo Tange. Kenzo Tange was obviously Japanese. He's also won the Pritzker in 1987. Okay, he was one of those people who was actually invited to the Siam conferences. So it was actually at the Siam conference that he presented one of the most famous sort of metabolist projects. So we will come to that a little later on. The project was called the Tokyo Plan, the Tokyo Bay Plan. But what we'll do is that before we get to his metabolist work, we'll just see what kind of work Tange was doing a little earlier. And we'll be doing that with his prize when these are the works that we'll be looking at. We're looking at this. This is 1970, 1959 is the period of Japanese metabolism. So we are looking at 1955, his prize winning entry for a memorial park for peace at Hiroshima in 1955. So this was Hiroshima after the bombing. You can see this entire city that's left in rubble with almost nothing left. This is called the Hiroshima Dome. It's one of the few buildings that was left standing after the bomb kind of went off. And Tange has a site that is very close to that entire dome. The Hiroshima Dome is here. That is the river. And this is the site that was then set aside as the site for the Hiroshima Memorial. And what Kenzo Tange does is that he makes an access from the dome directly downwards past a memorial arch into the main buildings, which are two main, with these two things on both sides. There's a chapel along the way. I'll just show you some of the images just to give you a sense as to the aesthetic that he was working with. And as you can see, it's this is the memorial arch itself, and you can see the dome on the other side. There's this big bar building that is right here at the bottom. that floats like piloti on stilts, and you can see the influence of Le Corbusier very strongly in it, whether that's the use of concrete, the piloti, the heavy muscular forms themselves. This is another image of that bar building on the other side with the two bridges that lead to the other side, and the water body that's there. That's the aerial view. You can see the axis, and this is the cross axis with the water, and that's the water body. The plan of the bar is very, very simple. Again, it's if you think about the plan of Miesian of a Mies building, it's very similar, where all the services and the circulation are removed from the edge, moved to the center until you get these completely free screens on both sides, which are of course punched in with windows. It's an extraordinarily sort of moving and popular monument, one of the sites that people go to visit every year. You can see the dome again framed between the legs of the park. But this is 1955. Some more images, I'll just go through them. In 1959 and 1960, Kenzo Tange goes to Otterloo conference, the conference where which really dissolved Siam, and when Team 10 really came into prominence. And Kenzo Tange attended many of the Team 10 meetings as well. This is what he comes up with to present as a future for the city of Tokyo, which also had been bombed completely during the war. And as you can see, this is the bay of Tokyo, and the project literally reaches out over the bay to create this entire landscape of homes. So the idea was to kind of make a bridge almost of floating homes into Tokyo. Now this kind of scale, this apocalyptic, enormous scale, seems to be one of the hallmarks, I would say, of much of the metabolist work, this mega structural imagination. The word mega structure as a structure that is like really large is an integral part of much of the Japanese metabolists thinking. And of that large kind of route of movement, which is a bridge that is hanging, you have roads that reach out leading into these, well, Japanese style roof homes that are floating over the water. All of these are these tiny homes that are floating over the water. The very idea was that this infrastructure that is being put in place will allow the city to continuously grow along these axes. So you can keep adding more modules, I guess, to the basic substructure, a model of the Tokyo Bay project. Details that were drawn of this. Obviously, this was a project that was a drawing project. Even in his architecture, that this is much later, this is later architecture, this is 1967, you will see a similar sort of sensibility that keeps the central core stable, but allows for things to be added to it. So while the services, etc., are held in the circular tower in the center, you have the kind of the boxes that are then very often attached to the outside. Including in this building, which is the Yamanishi Press and Broadcasting Center, where the very idea of the structure and the services being the main structural core is used to express an architectural language. So here, each of these towers houses the services. If you guys remember the Richards building by Louis Kahn, a very similar strategy there as well, where the lower level becomes a podium and the floors then span the upper side. Also, the aesthetic of the way that the surfaces meet the main columns. You see the fact that it's almost as if it's plugged in, as you can lift it and move out. And perhaps that was also part of the idea of the building, that this building was a building that could be that could change. Perhaps while the core stayed the same, maybe the floors could constantly change. And then that does become the way that the architectural language itself develops. The section is also a little complex, which kind of you're able to see within the section. The plans I've already shown you, but you can see the circular cores, each of them housing a different thing: a stair in one, a lift in another, probably some storage in some others as it rises up, while the floor plates in the middle constantly shift. But it was in 1960 that a group of people came together and called themselves the Japanese metabolists. There was a World Design Conference held in 1960 in Tokyo that is considered to be one of the most important design conferences for Japan. It had a bunch of people from around the world who attended, including Peter and Alison Smithson of Team 10, including Giancarlo De Carlo, whom we met last week, and including B.V. Doshi from India. So all of these people are meeting at this time at this World Design Conference. And it is in this design conference that a group of young Japanese architects put together a group that is called the Metabolists. And they write a manifesto, which they release at this time. Now, what they are really interested in is not so much, if you think, is not so much an architecture that is, let's say, growing, but they are also interested in an architecture that is follows the natural cycle of life. What that means is they're interested in an architecture that is born, that grows, and that also dies. They're saying that now older cities had become obsolete and a new metropolis needed to rise. The future of Tokyo is an organic one, a bio-Tokyo, a place where the interchange of energy, resources with the ecosystem become fundamental. Buildings should behave as cells or grow as vegetation like trees. And they say this because this is a quote from the manifesto. We regard human society as a vital process, a continuous development from atom to nebula. The reason why we use such a biological word, metabolism, is that we believe design and technology should be a denotation of human society, should be a denotation of human society. We are not going to accept metabolism as a natural process, but try to encourage active metabolic development of our society through our proposals. So what they are saying here is that life is changed, man. Everything is changing all the time. People are growing and dying, etc. But we realize that as architects, we need to intervene within them to encourage this kind of growth. Architects not sort of hinder this sort of growth, but should instead be a catalyst that can provide for opportunities for growth and change. So we'll be looking at some three architects, the three main signatories here, and looking at just some of the proposals that they made at that time. This is Kukutake Kiyonori. Again, and he is one of the more, I guess, one of the older ones of the group, who was part, who wrote that manifesto itself. Okay, we'll be looking at three works: one that is built and two that were merely suggested. The first is his own house, the Sky House, and the other two are two conceptual proposals, the Marine City and Ocean City, and we'll go over them a little quickly because you'll realize that they're quite samey after a while. They're these large mega structures that tend to grow. These are his sketches, and you can see the interest that he seems to have in how cells grow, how things reproduce, what are the ways in which we can learn from biology, from biological metaphors, biological systems, biological processes, about how architecture can respond to the complex growth and death cycles of human beings. This is his own house, the Sky House, the one that he built. It's a very simple house. It's before the Metabolist Manifesto. It's 1958. There are four kind of large pylons that are on four sides that are supporting this roof, this floor and the roof. It's a very straightforward plan, and even the plan in that sense is very straightforward. Simple square plan with a toilet attached to it, a stair that takes you up into the terrace from which you enter the building. The thing is that it was imagined that it was because of this sort of basic simplicity that this building could continuously take in new functions, take in new programs, be a place that could transform depending on whatever the needs and requirements were. Two of his conceptual proposals: Marine City, a city again like the Tokyo city on water. This was, I think, also presented by Kenzo Tange at the Siam conference, the last Siam. Again, the simple plug-in system. You see the fact that these are all in the water. You have these discs. On these discs are these towers. The towers centrally have a core, and on that core you have these capsules that can be, plugged in and out of these towers. more drawings of the same thing. I love the science fictional almost nature of these drawings. They are great fun. These discs, of course, are floating on water. This is the other thing. This is called Ocean City. Again, another proposal on the water. I'm not going to go into detail as far as that is concerned. The next character is a man called Kisho Kurokawa. He is one of the architects who actually got to build a large building that can be called Metabolist in some way. And has also, I guess, built the building that is most visibly and which is the most visible icon of the Metabolist movement. This is his quotation on the right side. And he says this: we have in Japan an aesthetic of death, while you have an aesthetic of eternity. The you, of course, being the Western sort of Europeans, I guess, whom he's referring to. The Ise shrines are built every 20 years in the same form or spirit. Whereas in the West, you try and preserve the actual Greek temple, the original material, as if it could last for eternity. So here he's saying a very important thing. He says that somewhere in Japanese culture, the idea of rebirth is deeply embedded. That Ise shrine that he's talking about is built every 20 years in exactly the same way that it has been for centuries, no matter what the new materials culture might be. He says that this idea that architecture exists in its material form and not in its idea, or architecture is a permanent thing and not something that should be able to die and should be able to in some ways be reborn if you feel like it, is something that he really is interested in incorporating within the architecture. And you can see why he's part of the Metabolist movement. Again, we'll be looking at three sort of conceptual projects and one project that was built a few years after the Osaka Expo, called the Nagakin Capsule Tower. That, of course, is the icon. The first one is called the Bamboo type community. Very similar, I would say, to Marine City again, but the center is imagined structurally as a piece of bamboo. So it's a ring rather than a rod. There's a void at the center. There's a monorail car that kind of goes up and down to get people. You have house units that are all attached to it, and from here you can kind of move along a corridor to the other units. So you use the structure of the bamboo because you're learning from bamboo and you're trying to think about it as an architectural kind of piece. His other project is called Agricultural City. It's this idea that we need to blur the boundary between the city and its fields. So the city in many ways envelops the field becomes the city. This is a grid that goes on endlessly across the landscape, incorporating within it agriculture itself. From these lower agricultural fields, you can come up to a first level. On the first level, you have some common facilities that are there. And then from the first level, if you go up, there are little mushrooms that are then placed above these common facilities that can, of course, change and move and do whatever they want to because they can, and where the people would live. This is another such kind of agricultural city drawing. You can, that's it. Yeah. The idea was that these living units would be like, I guess you could call them spontaneous outgrowths. People would move, make them, dismantle them, go somewhere else, dismantle them. Okay, so what would happen is that the substructure would become the permanent thing upon which informality would be possible. These are some more drawings of the way that it grew. It's supposed to grow. You can see the shadow, which meant, of course, that this is the floor that is above ground. All these parts of movement are all above the ground, held up on little columns, I guess, that reach the ground. Not completely resolved, I assume, but nevertheless. This is so here you're able to see the three levels. Here is the lower level with the fields themselves. You climb up to the first level, which has the common facilities, etc. And then from there you go up to these mushroom-like living pods that are then hanging above. So structural core has the service core and the living quarters cantilevered on both sides. Helix City, well, again, biological metaphors being used structurally. This is one of the more popular images of the Metabolist. Another project that kind of wants to take over the bay, the Kasumi Guara project, which was imagined as a place for fishermen. So in the drawings, you see these all sometimes for us maybe incongruous juxtapositions between traditional fishermen with nets in their hands, these enormous science fiction images of high rises and boats in the water, but also flying cars. So you have all these different times that seem to kind of collapse together within the way that these drawings have been made. But the building that actually got built and has become representative of the entire Japanese metabolist movement is this one, which is called the Nagakin Capsule Tower, designed by Kisho Kurokawa. This is the building itself. You can see it has a corner plot. It's raised up above the ground slightly, a little plaza, and then from there you have these two vertical cores that rise up, and along those vertical cores, these capsules have been plugged in. And that is really what the building is. You are able to, this is another view of it. You can see the three kinds of things and the towers that rise with these capsules that are there. The plan, you can see the two cores and the capsules themselves. There's a very tight within the core. There's a path of circulation. There is the lift block that takes you up. After which, of course, in that form you enter one room and a toilet. You enter another room and a toilet. You enter another room and a toilet. You have a core. Within the core, you have all the services that are also laid down. This is the capsule itself. It has a little circular porthole window through which you can look out. You enter from the back through the door. The bathroom is on the right side. If you guys remember the drawings by Peter and Alison Smithson of the houses that they are designed as these capsules, there is a clear evocation of that even within this, with this wall becoming a storage area which has all the infrastructure needed for the room itself. This is the building under construction, where you can carry them up and plug them in. Similar image to the Habitat Center image that we saw last week, or 2 weeks before. These are the units as they exist now. Little porthole windows through which you look out. And this like highly high-tech, I guess, but now look low-tech looking. It looks like nostalgia, 60s, 70s nostalgia furniture, no? This with that window and this. It looks like science fiction out of something like Stanley Kubrick or something, 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is sectional drawing, just like the sectional drawing, so I put it in there. You can see the thick way, the capsule itself, where the walls are carry the infrastructure. The structural frame and the paneling that holds it together. Another view on the left is Kisho Kurokawa himself sitting in a capsule, so that's how that image exists. But you can see the infrastructure wall on one side, the bed with the window on the other side. I wouldn't mind living here one night, but just one night. The last character that we'll be looking at is a man called Fumihiko Maki, who is still very much alive and active. In fact, he works closely with Sonal Sancheti, one of our faculty members, on projects that they do in India. Fumihiko Maki, in fact, won the Bihar Museum project with them. But that project is very different from the work that we'll be seeing today. This is his early works. We'll be starting with a piece of writing that he had done, which is called Investigations in Collective Form. This he had done as while he was studying in Washington, D.C., I think, because in Washington University in Seattle, I think. You have actually three kinds of forms that he proposes exist. One he calls compositional form. And in compositional form, he says these are the buildings which are likely composed. This is Brasilia by Niemeyer, where you're able to see these buildings as compositions and putting together these pieces, things like that. The second he sees a megastructural form. Megastructural forms are the forms of his compatriots, his metabolist compatriots. These large-scale structures that are taking over everything, that can do everything, that kind of thing, right? So, megastructure where everything is controlled. Composition versus megastructure. And the last is what he calls collective form. And collective form, he seems to refer back to the ways in which vernacular architecture emerges. This is a street in Japan where these houses all have been developed over many years through many generations, but all seem to have similar sort of characteristics. And in that, of course, he's also thinking about the way that beehives and natural architectures also seem to have a pattern that is a collective, that emerges out of a collective endeavor and is not part of either a mega structural imagination or an individual's compositional imagination. He does see similar things happening in vernacular architecture. Looking at the vernacular again a little later on as a source of architecture, but for the purpose of this lecture, we shall look at only 3 more such projects by Maki. One is this one, again conceptually, it's called the Golgi structure. It's supposed to be inspired by the nerve cells. His idea was to kind of allow these structures to invade places so that people can then come and inhabit them. Makes many drawings of these things, whatever they. Yeah. But the project is this one. It's a simple housing project called the Hillside Terraces, built over a 30-year period. So it's 30 years that this project evolves. And the reason why that is an important thing to note is that it was understood that that housing emerges over time and not immediately. And like the idea of the metabolist, he really thinks about patterns of growth as the building starts beginning to take shape. So while in the first phase only these 2 buildings are built, and in the third phase only this thing is built, which is a few years later, and the fourth phase this is built, the entire thing kind of emerges as one project that connects to these one another, and through the architectural language as well. So these are the 5-6 phases running over and an important the way then the scale and the movement city also. This is phase 1. I'm going to quickly go through them just to show you how the language of architecture stays similar. So while the first phase it consists of a corner of articulation of this building with this bar, you have a pedestrian system that's there below, inspired by the earlier streets in Tokyo. Then comes inside, goes back, becomes another empty space. This is the building 3 takes that street and turns it into a courtyard. Building 4 becomes a monument, a corner piece. This is the way that the entire project evolves. You can see the building. The last architect for the day is Zata Isozaki, not part of the 3 actually, but also very highly inspired by the metabolist movement right from the beginning. 3 projects again. He later on became what can be called a postmodernist and ended up winning the Pritzker. In fact, 2 of the metabolists went ahead and won Pritzker prizes out of the 7 Japanese architects who have won it so far, 7 or 9 maybe. And this is what we call the joint core system. It's a very the name of the system itself explains what the project was meant to be. There's a joint and there's a core and a joint. And you take the core and you keep joining it together, making dhad karke, you can make these large buildings that can run across it. In many ways, if you look at the joint core system and think about Kenzo Tange's building that we saw, this one, right? It is very similar idea where you can imagine the joint and these are the kinds of things that move with the joint and the cores. No? The core. Oops, lost myself in my rush. Yeah. Drawings of the joint core system. An important thing about Arato Isozaki, which for me distinguishes him quite a lot from the rest, is that he is, besides of course a building that grows over time, he's also interested in what is left behind. He's interested in the ruin. He says, in fact, that the ruins that formed my childhood environment were produced by acts of sudden destruction, Wandering among them instilled in me awareness of the phenomenon of obliteration rather than a sense of the transience of things. So unlike the others who are saying that things are changing, he's saying things just kind of sometimes just disappear. In projects like this, which is called the incubation project, which seem similar to the other projects, but actually have another far more apocalyptic imagination. With him, he takes this idea of is that the city need that is there below, which in this case was Tokyo, should die. Let's just forget it. Let's just let it go, man. You know, it's over. Its lifetime is done. It's been obliterated. What we will do instead is, build again in these new things. So it was as if new mushrooms are coming up where people will live in, while the older city is left to die and to ruin. Yeah. In fact, he says Tokyo is hopeless. I'm leaving everything below 30 meters to others. If they can unravel the mess the city is in, let them try. I will think about architecture in the city above 30 meters. An empty lot of 10 square meters is all I need on the ground. I will erect a column, and that column will be both a structural column and a channel for vertical circulation. So it's imagined that the city is so far gone that there is no hope for it. Let me just separate myself within my world, and I will live there happily ever after. It's a little like our gated communities of our cities today, in my reckoning, but nevertheless. This is a drawing that he made, which was called the Re-Ruined Hiroshima Project, where in a very dark kind of way, he made this, and this also happened in 1968. And if you guys remember, 1968 is the year of the riots, student riots in France, that really radically transformed many things in France and in Europe, right? This is a sort of photo montage, and what he's doing here is trying to, through this photo montage, build a critique of post-war Japan. He calls the architecture that emerged after that dead architecture. He wanted to, in some way, kind of talk about the fact that cycles of change and transformation, including that of death, need to be incorporated within the way that we think about architecture itself today. But rather than leave with this kind of desolation, let's look at the last final hurrah, as it were, of the Japanese metabolist movement that is largely acknowledged as the Osaka Expo of 1970. Another mega event held in Osaka. A huge site was put into place and master planned by Kenzo Tange. And Kenzo Tange then asked a bunch of Japanese architects to design different pavilions for different purposes within this expo. This was the plan of the expo. As you can see, there's got one long axis, and along that axis you see this large roof. That large roof was the main space called the Festival Square that was designed by Kenzo Tange. And you have a bunch of these other pavilions, a lot of them designed by three of the architects that we saw a little earlier. But the main space was this one that you're seeing on the right side, the Festival Square covered with a large space frame. Here you're able to see it again, the large space frame with a sculpture that was called the Victory of the Sun right at the center. And in the very sci-fi futuristic-ish landscape over here, you can see the fact that this becomes literally a playground to demonstrate what an architecture of the future could look like. And every single science fiction fantasy of the 1960s is played out within this landscape, when Kenzo Tange also invites Archigram, Joanna Friedman, all participate in the design of things for this expo. Just some images of the expo, some of the buildings I'll just quickly kind of zoom through. The first is the Festival Square, huge, enormous space frame that we will look at. I mean, once we get to the Archigram project and we see the work of Cedric Price, you'll see this idea of the Fun Palace and the Festival Square having a very close relationship with one another. This huge roof that's there. There's a large kind of monumental sculpture called the Tower of the Sun. That's like a symbolic center of the whole expo, with this plaza at its feet where everyone comes together. It's an enormous space, and look at the number of people there. Well, the rest are, I mean, literally like cool little science fiction fantasies. This like seems like some sort of strange walking robot. um, some, what do you call these? Jetson architecture, I guess you could call it. I guess you have seen the Jetsons. Trees that float with lights on them, like a fantasy land of science fiction. Almost comic book like. Yeah. Plastic cubicles, cell phones, amazing. And this is the work by Kiyonori Kikutake, the guy we saw in the beginning, called the Expo Tower. You could go up and you could take a look at the world from this tower. You can take the lift, go up, and then enter these little capsules. This is Kisho Kurokawa of your capsule tower fame. Similar capsule architecture, an entire grid of infrastructure. Unlike the two towers of the capsule tower, here the infrastructure is held within by a grid. Another image of the Kisho Kurokawa building. He also did another which is called the Toshiba Eye Pavilion. This is a system that's holding up this large oblong. So that is actually it for today. We've just covered the space between these two primary events and all the architecture that happened in that was trying to be inspired by the processes learned from nature. That's for today. That's it. For next week, we shall be looking at the direct. Actually, no, we'll be looking at the situationists. It's not necessarily the director. We'll be looking at the 1968 riots as well, a little more closely when we look at next week's architects. It'll be longer as well and more examples, I assume. Okay, I'm stopping sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, now there's some questions already. Fleur has some, and Fleur, you've answered. Shravan. Yeah, it's true.
Also, I had a
Of these
point.
ridiculous.
I had a point that kind of connects both the last lecture and this lecture, because like our last lecture was so much about community participation architecture, and then we have these like purely design visuals. Like these are surely built for the design and not any sort of practicality. I mean, I remember I had a particular guide who I had a constant back and forth with last year, because I didn't want to have a design that kind of overwhelmed the practicality and livability of my project. And my guide also, my guide also had their reasons for pushing me towards actually having a design concept. But I didn't want to overwhelm the practicality of my design. Yeah, it can be built in another space, but then I can build twice. If I don't think a design that can just be built somewhere else and doesn't is so disconnected from context that it can be built somewhere else is a bad thing if it can be done well. Like I'm not copy pasting plans like literally the building I'm living in. I was actually trying to fit to the context physically. There was just no subconscious context. I mean, why do we as I don't know, an occupation just have this sort of what's the word I can use in class? This attraction towards such a concept idea that needs to be there.
Good, I don't know. Seriously, I want to take that.
No, I'm actually thinking of something completely different. So not to take away from what Shravan is saying, but I think it is also you have to contextualize this entire sort of movement and the architects that we are seeing in the context of this kind of post-war absolute obliteration of cities. Okay, and finding new kind of ways and meanings to actually start start sort of building together. Okay, you have to little bit of contextualization has to happen, because otherwise you're right that like that those buildings which are being seen as built in the tower and things like that can appear quite what do you say, aggressive, and but you have to also remember that post sort of the bomb and this whole idea of Godzilla, or that there is an absolute destruction, and then we are going to have to find things from there is a strangely like very Japanese kind of mode of thinking, and Rohan, you have some Japanese friends also, and how they see this entire event and life in general. Like nature, for example, nature takes on a very different kind of a turn when you're speaking with them. And there is this desire to control. I don't know. I mean, if I'm making any sense, but yeah.
I think that's also Ambika wants to say something. Let's get Ambika in and see what she has to say. Ambika, what do you want to say?
Sorry. Ambika, your voice is like far away from across the mountains. Or
Hello. Am I audible now?
Move the microphone close to your mouth, my dear girl.
Let me rejoin to my phone. Give me a minute.
Oh no, you're fine now.
Better.
Okay. I feel like Japanese architects don't feel claustrophobic because they're so tiny and tight spaces. Even this entire idea of capsule hotels, I wouldn't spend more than a night in there, and that also is a punishment. It's a clever idea to save on space, but it's really crazy. It's like half the size of a matchbox size apartment. So I don't understand that. And secondly, coming to this idea of using cores and highlighting services and circulatory paths, I also thought of how Japanese shrines work because they also have a central core, but that's because they want to save themselves from seismic stresses. So that one core or the Shinbashira column can absorb the seismic stresses and allow for a slight sway like a tree. So I think that's very beautiful and poetic in a way. And I see that being carried forward here. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Point actually. It's a good idea. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Atharva?
Atharv has his hand.
Yeah, during the whole lecture, as well as when Ambika said ki the feeling of being claustrophobic. So I think the Japanese metabolism and the Mada buildings are like same in some sense. Like
You may be right. They also use
अच्छा बोलते
prefabricated
हैं दूसरे को
capsules.
गाली देते हैं बस.
Shyam?
हाय वो मेटाबॉलिज्म मैनिफेस्टो ऐसा कुछ तो वो नाम था उनका. तो मुझे लगा कि वो एक्चुअली दो अलग वर्ड्स है क्योंकि मेटाबॉलिज्म ऐसे प्रमोट करता है ना कि चेंज होना चाहिए और तुम लोग मैनिफेस्टो मतलब ये कोई तो सॉलिड चीज दे रहे हो, मतलब दोनों चीज एकदम ऐसे दोनों के अलग चीज तुम लोग एक सेंटेंस में डाल रहे हो ऐसा लगा. और दूसरा ये लगा कि उन्होंने सारी दुनिया के लोगों को बोला. मुझे लगा कि आप जो बोल रहे थे मुझे लगा कि आप सब आएंगे डिस्कस करेंगे और फिर मैनिफेस्टो लिखा जाएगा. आपने बोला कि सब लोग आए और उन्होंने मैनिफेस्टो प्रेजेंट किया तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि
ऐसे है मैनिफेस्टो ऐसे हाँ ऐसे ही किया था उन्होंने. लेकिन मुझे लग रहा है कि at one level there is a teasing playful part to it. I think that that these are that many of these drawings are meant to be or maybe that's only me, maybe that comes from my interest in Archigram and those guys, but I feel like a lot of them are also treating architectural drawing as provocation more than as actual serious proposals. Sometimes I feel they're just ideas that they're throwing out there, hoping something, hoping we'll start thinking about something. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, Rohan, I have always found the fascination with anime and manga, especially with the very much like this idea that there is that we feed from the virtual, very strong in the Japanese kind of contemporary mode.
In these, I mean, in this mode, but there's also the other there's also the whole other Zen thing, you know, the all of these Fujimoto and Ando and all of these guys like, oh, spirit, you know, that Zen Buddhist stuff, right? Maybe we should look at those also, and all of that kind of wabi-sabi and aesthetics and stuff. Maybe we'll do that next semester.
Minimalism.
Yeah, minimalism. Aparna also wants to say something.
Hi. So I found some similarities between Aldo Van Eyck and Kisho Kurokawa, like in the orphanage, the Amsterdam orphanage, where he uses this concept of in between by using a threshold, and where he combines this public and private realm. And I had also seen the structure by Kisho Kurokawa. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. It was Daido. Saini, I think. So he also uses this semi-publicness sort of idea where like the people, basically like the pedestrian walkway, it passes through the building, like for the convenience of the downtown. So I found that idea quite interesting of using this in between where they use in both the structures.
Cool.
The other thing also, Rohan, is to remember that 450% increase in the GDP is also predominantly with the technological kind of advancement that Japan has kicked off, you know, and the entire electronic revolution, the fact that you have all these things, you know, Nintendos, etc., like everything is actually at one point of time coming out of Japan, you know, and it is only in the later stages that it moves to Taiwan or Macau and all these other places. But otherwise, the core of the technological innovations have happened in Japan. So they are really sort of forerunners in this kind of what do you say, completely automated kind of mode of life as such, you know, and a lot of these things are at play. This is to respond to Shravan's frustration also a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in some sense, I do understand the idea of it as art. And for landmarks, yeah, these kind of structures do make sense where it's more driven by the idea of it than its actual form. But when it comes to more regular architecture, like there is a space for landmarks and a space for houses in some sense. And the two do intersect in some point. I'm not saying they don't.
I think there is this. I also think that there is a certain romantic imagination that we have of space, and like if I think about, I wonder whether we all have that similar sort of romantic imagination of domestic space of, you know, sweet running around, you know, that kind of domestic space. I'm actually wondering whether in Japan they have other imaginations of the domestic that don't necessarily replicate our idea of the hearth as the space for domestic
From
life.
my experience with their like pop culture, I don't think they actually do, because it's so much about the outdoors and like being like the home is just seen as like it's literally an object for living in some sense, or a machine for living.
Maybe it's another toy, you know?
Yeah. Like if you look at, I mean, I know everyone here has seen Doraemon. Like you hardly see anything set in the house. In Shinchan, you hardly see anything set in the house. It's always outdoors. There's schools and the parks are there, at least in the 80s. And like even Pokemon has this imagination of like leaving home at the age of 10. Your mother just sends you out into the world to fend for yourself. Like, yeah. And it's not that they're removing from the build. It's just the home that they're kind of removing themselves from.
Very interesting.
Kowloon Wall City, yeah, it is demolished. It was demolished. Right now there's a park there with a museum.
Memorial park, yeah.
Museum also. You can go in there inside one and you can see some.
The first kind of building that was built on the site, the original building is now kept as it is because it was a Chinese outpost. So rest of it is all a park.
And you have the section of the building as the monument.
Yeah.
I
have a book, Rohan, called the City of Darkness, and it is a collection of photographs and interviews with people living in the walled city, and all kinds of things, of course. Still don't believe Kowloon was real. Yeah.
So let's meet next.
All right.
Class.
Next class.
Huh?
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Rohan, attendance. Rohan, attendance.
Attendance. I have to take.
Download and send.
तुला नहीं मिळत काय हे?
Because you start the meeting, I can't.
Oh, okay, assist.
And my problem is I'm always like, by the time I finish this thing, order lunch, I'm always at the lunch.
I'll send.
lunch. Okay, take it, bye. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,